385 days less the Russian invasion of Ukraine. 10th meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in the Ramstein format took place yesterday online, reports Interfax Ukraine. United States Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said while opening a virtual meeting that 9 countries have already agreed to send more than 150 Leopard tanks to Ukraine. After the meeting, he stressed that the participants reaffirmed their unity in support of Ukraine's struggle for freedom. Sweden has announced that it will provide Ukraine with 10 Leopard tanks and key components for air defense. Norway is cooperating with the United States to transfer 2 NASAMS systems to Ukraine. The Netherlands is making significant progress in initiating new contracts to ensure the delivery of new weapons to the battlefield, said Austin. The US Defense Secretary thanks Slovenia for the latest contribution, which will help meet several priority needs of Ukraine, including armored vehicles. According to the official, the participants of Ramstein will help Ukraine in the future to receive tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and other armored vehicles, as well as urgently train the Ukrainian military in new capabilities. Spanish Defense Minister Margarita Robles confirmed that Ukraine will receive 4 more Leopard 2 tanks, in addition to the 6 already promised by Madrid, plus a new batch of M113 armored personnel carriers, reports European Pravda. Canada's Defense Minister Anita Anand announced a new package of military aid for Ukraine as well. Canada will provide Ukraine with about 8,000 rounds of artillery ammunition, 12 anti-aircraft missiles from the Canadian Armed Forces inventory, 1,800 rounds of tank training ammunition to support the Leopard 1 tanks being supplied by Denmark, Germany and the Netherlands. Defense Minister of Ukraine Oleksiy Reznikov said that the results of the meeting inspire optimism. He said that there were decisions to continue strengthening air defense, ammo supplies, trainings and forming an armored fist. He thanked the US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin for his outstanding leadership and also expressed gratitude to friends from the anti-Kremlin coalition. In his evening video address, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky thanked Ramstein participants for their support, which is especially important now when we feel that the Russian aggression is approaching the point where it can break. According to the president, there is no terrorist that can build up its potential in confronting the free world. Russia is no exception. The more pressure we put on them, the faster we will move towards restoring our territorial integrity and international legal order, stressed Zelensky. We would really appreciate if you could recommend us to your friends and family, as well as share information on social media. Also, if you like what we do and want to tip us, you can now do so directly to our PayPal. Check out the link in the description to this episode for more details. Your support inspires us. Denmark announced plans to establish a fund worth over $1 billion for military, civil and business assistance to Ukraine in 2023, reports Militarny. According to the Danish government, the fund will include 3 parts. The first part of $767 million will consist of military support through delivering weapons, other military equipment and personnel training. The second part of $170 million will provide civilian support aimed at acute humanitarian problems as well as long-term reconstruction. The third part of $57 million will be spent on support for business initiatives that enable Danish companies to contribute to the reconstruction of Ukraine. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky thanked Denmark for establishing this fund. He said that support of Ukraine will bring our common victory over the aggressor and the return of peace to Europe closer. According to the UK delegation to the OSCE, the Russian regular troops and the Wagner Group lost 20 to 30,000 killed and wounded in the battles for Bakhmut since May 2022, reports Ukrinform. At the same time, total advance of Russian forces in the area was about 25 kilometers. Separately, delegation representative indicated that apparently Russia is running out of missile reserves. This is evidenced by the increasing intervals with which the Russian Federation strikes the critical infrastructure of Ukraine. According to him, the issue of providing the Russian troops with equipment is just as urgent. Russia suffered huge losses of heavy armored vehicles, which forced it to deploy 60-year-old T-62 main battle tanks to the front. The UK Supreme Court denied Russia in making a summary judgment in a case on the recovery of Ukraine's debt on bond with a nominal value of $3 billion, reports Interfax Ukraine. The case will be sent for a full public trial. The Ukrainian side considers the decision a victory as it will allow Ukraine to present its own evidence. The bonds worth $3 billion were issued by the Yanukovych administration and bought by Russia. Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal considers the decision of the UK Supreme Court an important victory for Ukraine over Russia on the international front. According to the Prime Minister, the court recognized the strong position of the defense of Ukraine regarding coercion and threats of Russia to use force, which the Russian Federation carried out back in 2013 to force Ukraine to issue these Eurobonds. Highlights from Ukraine is an uncommercial initiative of just two people, and we need your help to grow. Share information about the podcast, rate us in the apps, subscribe to our Patreon. With your support, we are getting better. For 386 days, Ukraine stands strong against the forces of the Russian invasion. Polish President Andrzej Duda announced that his country will transfer 4 MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine in the coming days, reports Militarny. He added that other MiG jets Poland has need repair. Germany delivered another batch of military aid to the Ukrainian army, reports Interfax Ukraine. The German Defense Ministry informed that the aid package includes 5,000 artillery shells, an unknown amount of high-precision ammunition for the Mars 2 multiple-launch rocket systems, as well as 25 generators. In addition, the package also contains 4 mobile antenna mast systems, 2 forklift trucks, 2 hangar awnings, as well as 500 SPF-9 pistols. The ministry also reports that Germany is preparing to transfer another 5,000 shells, plus an unknown number of missiles for the IRIS-T air defense systems. Later, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz also said that the participants of the EU summit scheduled for March 23-24 will agree on steps to provide Ukraine with the necessary ammunition in a timely manner. Armin Paperger, CEO of the German defense concern Rheinmetall, said this week that Ukraine had requested the EU to supply 250,000 rounds of ammunition per month. He said such volumes of ammunition would be difficult to produce, as it will require doubling the current capacities. The Swedish government approved transfer of 8 Archer self-propelled artillery systems to Ukraine, reports European Pravda. Swedish Defense Minister Pell Jonsson said that the Archer artillery systems will help Ukrainian forces defeat Russian artillery. According to him, it is the ability to hit enemy artillery systems deep behind the lines that makes the Archer unique. Ukraine will receive the first Archers within the next several months. The systems will first be equipped with computerized fire control, then the Ukrainian military will undergo training, and the logistics hub for maintenance and repair will be set up near Ukraine. It is expected that Ukraine will be able to use 6 of the 8 Archers on the battlefield at any time, as the 2 must be kept in reserve, for example for spare parts. Earlier, Sweden decided to send 10 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine in preparation for the upcoming counteroffensive. France delivered the IMX10 RC armored personnel carriers, which are also classified as wheeled tanks, to Ukraine, reports Defense Express. French Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu said to the Defense Commission of the French National Assembly that some of the vehicles have already gone to the front line. At the same time, it is not specified how many armored vehicles were delivered to Ukraine in total. The IMX10 RC is a combat armored vehicle designed for conducting reconnaissance. It has been in service of the French armed forces since 1981. The IMX10 RC is equipped with a 105mm gun, a 7.62mm machine gun, and 2 electrically operated smoke grenade launchers. Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Agency believes that Iran took a wait-to-see position in the matter of providing Russia with ballistic missiles, reports Interfax Ukraine. Deputy Chief of the agency Vadim Skibitsky said that Tehran supplies ammunition to Russians. Russia is also trying to get other types of weapons, including new types of unmanned aerial vehicles. According to the intelligence, as Russia has started to suffer ammo deficiency, it holds talks with Myanmar, African countries and Middle East to procure them. We would really appreciate if you could rate us with 5 stars or the equivalent in the apps where you are listening to this podcast: Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify. This way more people would learn about the highlights from Ukraine and truth about Russia's invasion. In his evening video address, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky reminded that a year ago the Russian military committed one of the worst crimes of this war. Russian bombs destroyed a theater in Mariupol. A building marked with the sign "Children" was used as a shelter. There were women with children, pregnant women and the elderly there. A civilian object deliberately destroyed by the occupier. We still don't know the exact number of victims, stressed the president. He assured that the day will come when a tribunal will be established to bring justice to Ukrainians and punish the aggressor. Chair of the United Nations Human Rights Council Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine, Eric Mose, said yesterday that the Commission's investigation into human rights violations in Ukraine has not found evidence that Russia committed genocide, reports Interfax Ukraine. Mose added that during the investigation, the Commission has noted that there are some aspects which may raise questions with respect to the crime of genocide, but they have not yet put in any conclusion here. At the same time, a report released by the Commission says that the Russian authorities have committed a wide range of violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law in various regions of Ukraine, many of which constitute war crimes. In particular, these war crimes include attacks on civilians and energy infrastructure facilities, premeditated killings, illegal imprisonment, torture, rape, and other types of sexual violence, as well as illegal displacement and deportation of children. The Commission's evidence shows that in the areas taken under its control, the Russian authorities committed deliberate killings of civilians or persons not participating in hostilities, which is a war crime and a violation of the right to life, the UN said. The Russian Parliament Duma adopted a law according to which citizens of Ukraine who received Russian passports in the temporarily occupied territories can renounce Ukrainian citizenship after submitting a corresponding application to the Russian authorities, reports Interfax Ukraine. Ukraine believes it to be an attempt to legitimize the illegal annexation of the captured territories and the illegal passportization of their inhabitants. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated that the decision of the Russian Duma grossly violates the legislation and norms of international law. It is void and has no legal consequences. Ukrainian citizens living in the temporarily occupied territories will retain Ukrainian citizenship despite Russian legislation. Known Ukrainian archaeologist PhD Yuri Kovalenko was killed in action in the Battle for Bakhmut, reports Novinarnya. Kovalenko was 56 years old. He was known for his work on the Ukrainian Cossack capital of Baturin. Kovalenko had served in the armed forces since 2020.
Finance edition. Why? Because the banks are collapsing. I'm losing all my money. If this episode cuts out in the middle of it, it's because I can't afford the cloud fees, whatever, all of that anymore. Just kidding. I don't have any money in the bank, but that's what a lot of companies were saying on Friday, that they're not going to be able to survive. There was people like Bill Ackman or Gary Tan saying this is a crisis that could pull back innovation 10 years. I call bullshit. I call that these people just had investments that, hey, if the government didn't save all of these depositors, guess what? I bet you bridge loans would have saved them, and they could have found a loan from some bank, and everyone knew that the assets are there. It's just going to take time to figure out whatever. And some of these companies would have had to figure shit out for 6 months and stressed a little, whatever. I personally don't really support that. I know a lot of people are going to say, you don't understand finance, this and that. I understand enough. And my main thing that my main point that I'm focusing on is what's the point of FDIC insuring $250K if FDIC is going to insure 100%? If they're just going to insure 100%, why do we even have the $250K? What's that mean? It seems like it's a made up number if it's just going to be 100% at the end of the day. That's number one. Number two, and I feel like I think you know more than a lot of people that I am confused with a lot of my views. And I go back and forth because I don't agree with both sides. Both sides seem ridiculous, whatever. So like at one point I was, I'd say, leaning a little bit more capitalist and saying, yeah, people get loans or funds because they produce. And like, I do understand that point of view a little bit. You're not going to, you give $1 million to someone who's more likely to give the $1 million back, whatever. But my argument to that is there's so many poor people who've never had the chance to produce because they've been experiencing trauma, or they've been so stressed, or they've had to work bullshit jobs to feed themselves instead of having like a little bit of time a day to create and to produce like on their own and whatnot. And it's like all of these people or this big bank and all of these people are getting free loans, interest-free loans in the billions of dollars total. What if we gave billions of free loans to poor people I don't know, maybe like there'd be some dope shit that comes out of that. And instead they're like, no, we need this innovation. I'm cool with waiting 10 years for the next Uber because guess what? I don't think Uber really improved our lives that much. At first, it looked like it. Uber takes just as long as a taxi took when it first came out. Like Ubers take 20 minutes now. Ubers are more expensive than taxis when they first came out. So like the two things that Uber promised aren't there. And guess what the kicker is? Uber's never even made money. So who the fuck cares? Like there's nothing good that's came of Uber. So people are like, oh, but Y Combinator has 1,000 companies that aren't going to be able to make it. And that's so much innovation. Who cares? Like, it's not a big deal. We can wait 10 years.
Well, and it's one of those things too. It's like if the next great food delivery app is, goes under, it's sort of like if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to see it, doesn't make a noise. It's like,
right.
Like it would suck. Like if there's like bioengineering or like revolutionary, like nanotechnology, healthcare companies that are going under, like, yeah, that might have an impact, but like, I'm pretty sure that's probably a minority of the VC
and
space.
They're going to get a bridge loan. Those people will get funding. If it's an actual viable idea, they'll get funding.
Well, and I think that's the thing that a lot of people that like a lot of people, and you and I probably know this, but like in the VC space, most of these companies that were like banking with SVB were never going to succeed. They're going to die. They're going to be sold for parts within the next 3 to 4 years anyways. Like what happens with so many of these venture funded enterprises is it's like, oh, well, this didn't work out or the team ended up sucking. So now we're going to sell all the assets for 20 cents on the dollar to other companies that can use their technology or use their hardware that they developed or whatever. Like, and then the VCs write it off as a loss and on to the next. Like the idea behind venture capital is you make bets on like 10 different companies, expecting basically 9 of them to fail and 1 of them to pay off 100x. Yeah, and like that's how the economics of VC investing typically works. Like it's not like these venture capital funds are picking 100% winners. They pick mostly losers. It's just that when they pick a winner, it's something that has such high scale and ability to grow that it more than covers all the losers they funded. And so it's, I don't know, like the whole thing is just, it's just crazy. And I think it's the one thing that is interesting is that the reason that SVB got into such trouble is that they tied up all their money in these long-term or these treasury bonds, and they bought them when interest rates were low. And so they weren't able to unload them now that interest rates are high, because inflation has pushed these bond rates so high that no one wants to buy a treasury bond with a 1% interest rate anymore. So it's like, it's almost this ironic thing where if they had invested their money differently, or maybe in assets that were like slightly more risky, but that paid higher, they might have been able to liquidate assets better. And another thing I saw, and I don't know if this is just like a right-wing swipe at the Biden administration, but apparently like SVB and other companies that were investing heavily in these low interest rate bonds were basically being told like, oh, inflation's not going to be really a big thing. Like you remember when inflation first started taking off, and they're like, this is transitory. It's not here to stay. It's going to be reined in 6 months. It's going to be reined in 8 months. It's going to be reined in 10 months. And then it turns out it's like, oh no, this is sort of continuing to be a thing. And now interest rates are rising. And it's like, so it's and again, it's the people that were actually sort of paying attention and knew how like inflation worked was like, this interest is not going to, or this inflation is not going to be transitory. It's like we had been pumping money into the economy. We're just opening up. All these people had savings. Everyone's spending all the money they hoarded during COVID. And it's like, that's an inflationary spike. So I don't know, but it is just disappointing because it's like, I think you're absolutely right. It's, at this point too, me, I lean sort of more right than you, and I'm very much into capitalism. But at the same time, like I have trouble looking at this and being like, look, if we could take $50 billion and plow it into, the Philadelphia school district or helping youths, or basically being like, I don't know. And the thing is,
fentanyl, let's fight fentanyl, or like the drug problem. Like let's help all those people and rehab them, whatever. The amount of money that's being loaned here is so much that can be used for so much else, but no, the banks just have to survive, whatever. And then I guess what I'm curious is like, why are these people ever going to stop? Why would you stop if you can risk as much as you want and at the end of the day, it's not going to get you in trouble or whatever. Like, this is obviously going to happen again, right?
Well, exactly. And it's like, and look, I don't necessarily blame the VC companies and everything else pushing for and asking for what they got, because any rational person would.
Right.
Like, it's a completely rational choice to make. The people I blame is the government.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
they could have said, no, hey, there's a giant private finance market out here. Go figure it the fuck out.
Yeah. Exactly.
And again, look, I am happy that to some degree, like, it would have been very upsetting if they bailed out the SVB, like, bondholders and shareholders. Like, if you had money in SVB, your money's gone. You're not getting that back. Like, they're just covering they're just covering depositors and everything like that, which I still don't love it, but I can see the arguments behind it. But
I agree. I understand it, and I know it's not a bailout the way that things were bailed out in 2008. But yeah, in my opinion, the word bailout means like you're helping them not fucking fail. And essentially that's kind of what they're doing. Well,
and especially because, in the private equity industries and VC industries, like, there's this whole idea of like creative destruction. Like, creativity and innovation can come out of industries crumbling or things failing. And it's like, there is a world in which when these things failed, it could have been a great reset and basically redirected capital away from companies that are probably going to fail in 2 to 3 years anyways, and just being like, well, you know what? This was sort of on shaky legs anyway, so we're just going to pull the plug now, and now we're going to redirect funds into our companies that are really showing promise or that really are delivering innovation. But now you've got so many startups that are like horseshit that do like, but they've got slick founders who are talented and they've got good developers, and it's like, well, maybe this could be a thing, but it's like, but what are you really adding? What value are you really creating? And one thing I saw that was interesting, because you brought up the point about like the FDIC and what does it matter with these limits if they're just going to get backstopped anyways? And I saw someone, I forget who it was, but basically someone tweeted out or wrote a blog post about being like, maybe this calls for a rethinking of banking for people that have really, really like high capital requirements, and saying, instead of us paying interest on your accounts, you pay us a fee to hold your incredibly high balance, and we insure 100% of it. So if you want to have $500 million in a bank account, you pay us 0.1% per year of your balance, but we will guarantee all of it. And then they're privately insured through like Lloyd's of London or whatever, or reinsurance. And they've got this, you could have a whole private system that basically makes this point moot. And then the average American who doesn't have over $250,000 in one bank account is fine, covered by the FDIC, and it operates just like it is. Like, I think that's a pretty actually interesting idea, because it's like, look, if you've got 500 million, like Roku had, I think, $465 million in a single account. And now, yes, that's a big company, and that's probably their operating account or payroll or something, but it's like, that's like what, 200 times, 2,000 times the FDIC limit? Like, that's nuts.
Yep.
Like,
yeah, no, I agree. And I don't know, I'm just thinking, I don't want to say anything too dumb, but maybe you tell, I said it all the time. Maybe you tell companies like, hey, that's tax deductible or something, like you entice them. And it's like,
exactly.
We're probably going to save money by not bailing out these banks or by having all this financial calamity if we just have these systems in place. And it's like, I think that's a great idea. And I would hate to have a negative interest rate, because that's what it sounds like for people. But yeah, for high interest accounts, that sounds completely fine. And then it's like, banks can actually, and high value companies can make other moves. It just takes a little more effort. Yeah. All of these companies for the last year could have invested a little bit into gold, into silver, into like shorter term investments. They parked it into mortgage-backed securities that they can't touch for 10, 20, 30 years, like a long time. That's what messed them up. But a little bit more focus and like just management would have been fine also. Like, this was an issue, but it was also, they just didn't do anything.
Well, and that is interesting, because like the mortgage-backed securities thing, that was a driver in 2008. This collapse was really driven by the fact that they were investing in the most risk-free asset you can have, these T-bonds, these T-bills that we're paying only 1% though, which means no one wants to buy them on the open market and they're not going to take a haircut on them. And then here we have the collapse. Now, the other thing that I think there should be people in handcuffs or at least getting money clawed back is you had the high-level executives of SVB selling off their stock in the weeks leading up to this. And apparently they literally, and I don't know if this is true, I read it on one source, apparently they paid out their bonuses to their executive team within hours before being taken over by regulators. Within hours. Criminal.
That's criminal.
That like those people, at the very least, they should get that money clawed back from them.
Yeah.
Like at the very least.
At the very least.
At the very least.
Do you have anything better for us this week, or what's the other problem that we're facing right now?
This story is a little bit old, and we sort of talked about it, but it's changing. So I wanted to get your thoughts on it. So remember, the Nord Stream pipeline that got blown up, and when it first happened, like a year ago or 8 months ago or whenever, the first thing was, oh, well, Russia did it. And it's like, well, that doesn't make sense because it's Russia's pipeline. And if they didn't want to deliver gas through it, they can literally just flip a switch on the supply side and then no gas runs through it. So why would they blow up their own infrastructure? And there was actually, I believe it was literally at the time it happened in a now deleted tweet, I believe it was someone from like a Polish government official or like a Polish ambassador that basically tweeted out like, thanks to the US for blowing up this pipeline, but then quickly deleted it. Because I think his assumption was like, obviously the US would have done this because it's like a move.
It makes the most sense.
Hurt Russia. Now, then about a month ago or a few weeks ago, the Seymour Hersh guy comes out. He's the one who, he's a journalist who revealed the My Lai massacre, I think as well as some other big stories, and typically a well-regarded journalist. And he basically said the U.S. did it. He had a single anonymous source, so obviously a little bit shaky if we're being realistic. But again, the story sort of intuitively made sense because everyone from the beginning said, if anyone blew up this pipeline, it couldn't have been random terrorists. Like this had to be a government-backed action. And really it was like,
a lot of governments aren't even capable of it.
It was basically, from what I remember, it was like 5 or 6 countries could have done this. It could have been like China, Israel, the US, France, or Russia. And like, well, Russia's not going to do it.
I think, Finland, you said? Or like
France. France.
One of the Nordic countries, I think, can because of like their sea abilities.
Probably as well. But regardless, so I think about a week ago, the New York Times came out with a story that says it's very likely that a pro-Ukrainian group blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Now, Jeremy, would you define the U.S. government as a pro-Ukrainian group?
I would say they are the pro-Ukrainian group.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, and now everyone's like, now the New York Times has it, and it's like, oh, well, that makes sense. It makes total sense. And it's like, I guess the point I'm trying to make here is just like, you need to understand how often you're being gaslit by the media and by the government, because a year ago or whenever this first happened, if you had said the U.S. government did it, you would have been called a psycho. If you had said a pro-Ukrainian group did it, you would have been, well, they would never do that because it's such a possible escalation and it's going to make Russia mad or it's going to really inflame things. And now it's like, well, obviously a pro-Ukrainian group did it. All the same people who have the Ukrainian flags in their bios that were telling you when this happened that there's no way a pro-Ukrainian group would have done this, impossible, are now basically accepting it as fact. And it's like
same as the lab leak. The same thing as the lab leak.
It's just, and it's
so
and like, and it's so upsetting.
I mentioned something similar to like very respected Facebook friend I have, like super smart guy, seems to know more than a little bit about like everything. He can kind of comment on everything, and like you look it up, you verify he definitely knows what he's talking about. And I actually asked him recently, like how he thinks the way he thinks, because it's obviously different. He has a very good like point of view on stuff, and I wish I remembered specifically what it was, but he was like trained in this way of thinking. But long story short, what I asked him, like or I mentioned about the lab leak, and I was like, it's kind of messed up that there's 18 like government agencies, and it's like 9 of them say one thing and 9 of them say another, and actually not even that. There's like 3 say one, 4 say another. There's so many opposing views. And then he said this next thing, and it kind of flipped my head instantly. And I was like, he's like, isn't that good? He was like, wouldn't it be a bad thing if everyone just said the same exact thing and there's no question about it? And I was like, you know what? I guess that does make sense. And he's like, a lot of these agencies have different information. And when we were talking about the lab leak, he's like, the Department of Energy used to actually be in control of all of these like chemical labs and whatnot. So he's like,
they still are, like that's part of
still are, or like they developed them. They were the ones who actually like started them, whatever he said. But he was like, they probably have a lot of information that the FBI doesn't, because the FBI probably just knows about these whatever, and the CIA has their own information about the government in Russia, blah blah. So he's like, they're all playing with different information, and it's kind of good that they're not saying the same thing, because if they're saying the same thing, that's pretty sketchy too, of like, why are they all saying the same thing? Like, they can't be that. So like, I don't know. I understand both sides. I do think the fucking pipeline was definitely done by us, or done by someone at our direction. Like we said, Finland, go do this.
The one thing that I'd bet all my money on is that the US was at least aware it was going to happen, right, or knew about it. Like, it was either someone told them, hey, we're going to do this at the very least, and they did nothing to stop it. Or because like, there is no way, because we have supplied more money to Ukraine, I believe, than every other country combined. Like, this is basically our war that we're funding. And when I say our, I mean the US government. And
you're part of the US government now?
But it's, I think it's, the key is, and to double back to sort of like your buddy and all this, like, and this is just sort of the natural contrarian in me, and I feel you're probably a little bit the same way. Like, anytime when something comes out and everyone is in alignment and everyone is saying the same thing, I immediately go to like, well, what if that's not the case?
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's so rare that you have widespread agreement on anything between lots of differing voices. And I remember there's a great scene, and it's actually, I believe it's in the book too, in World War Z. It talks about the Israeli government, that after the Holocaust, that the Israeli government installed a policy that when they're discussing issues, if a group of 10 people are discussing a topic, and if 9 of them agree on one solution or one explanation, it is the duty of the 10th man to disagree with them and to say, well, what if that's not the case?
I like that.
And in the case of World War Z, it was basically, it's like they had a group of 10 people discussing whether or not zombies actually existed, and everyone was like, no, that's no way. And then it was the one guy's job to be like, well, I have to assume now that they do exist. And it ended up in the book and in the movie with Israel being extremely well prepared for the plague outbreak of zombies, and them being able to defend themselves better than many other countries. And it's like, I don't know, it's just sort of that thing. It's like, I'm not to say that like you immediately opt in if everyone's saying one thing, but like, if everyone around you is saying that this is obviously what happened, you're not insane to think that like, well, what if they're not right? Right. Like, as a thought exercise, what if these people are wrong? Now, it's not to say you whip out your tinfoil hat and assume like, well, obviously the opposite is true, but at least asking, well, what if it was true? Or what would need to happen for the opposite to be the case? Yeah. Like, I think that's something that's, I think, smart people engage in to some degree, because it keeps you sharp. If nothing else, just going through the thought exercise and saying, well, what would it take for this not to be the case? Or what would it take for the opposite to be true? It's an interesting thought experiment. And I think it keeps you sharp versus instead of just falling in line all the time. Yeah. And I think, look, with the lab leak, like, fucking paid off. Like, I will eat my hat if it turns out that lab leak, if the lab had zero to do with the outbreak of COVID.
Yeah. It seems like we're not going to ever really know conclusively too, because there's always going to be someone who says otherwise, whatever. But back to the pipeline, are we going to know about that, or is that going to be the same thing too? Most likely, we'll never know. This is the
sort of thing that like you and me, when we're like 85 years old and documents get declassified, or some like government, changes hands and releases these classified documents, like it's possible that we will eventually know what happened, just like it's eventually possible that we'll know what the details around Kennedy's death actually were. Like,
you think